Right, guys, that shows we can all have fears, can't we? And there are things out there to be fearful of. And we can get information, and we can get information that's not so good. And we have to make a decision about who's trustworthy and who's not trustworthy. So I'm talking about fear not today. And please, I just want to say that sometimes there is fear out there that causes anxiety and depression and medical conditions and stuff like that. I'm not talking about those fears. We need special help with those fears. But what I'm going to help you with today is learning something about how we can all deal with fear and how God can help us with our fear. Okay? So, have we all been afraid? Nathan Bonnar, have you been afraid? Of who? Yeah, that's right. That's the way I like to keep it. Okay, that's right. Afraid of his mother, and so he should be. That's right. Okay, and we've all been afraid. A little bit afraid of some things. Is fear okay? Yes, fear is okay. God actually gave us fear because sometimes if we don't have fear, when there's an emergency, we won't get out of the way. And sometimes fear or reverence for God is also a good thing, isn't it? But sometimes our fears can get out of control. Sometimes our fears become too big. And we actually need to do something about them. So this story about the 12 spies today, I'm going to let you see something about fear. You can see if we can bring up my first slide of the second one. That's right. Problem with the fear that the 12 spies had. Number one. We bring up the first one. Was they disregarded God's plan. God had a plan. They were to go into the land of Canaan. And they decided to disregard that. Number two, fear can sometimes also make us distort God's plan. Okay? The spies saw a few giants. All those people in Canaan weren't giants. There were a few. But they said, when they came back and reported, all the people are giants. So sometimes fear distorts what's actually real. Next one. Discourage. Fear can discourage us. And do you know what? Not only discourage us, but discourage everybody around us too. We can actually make our fear discourage others. Because that's what they did. 10 spies discouraged the whole population of Israel, which had become over 2 million people by then. Next one, disbelieve. Sometimes fear makes us disbelieve God's promises. God had made a promise that Canaan would be their land. He had promised it to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And we can sometimes put aside God's promises. And do you know what? How easy we can forget what God has done for us. Think of all those things God had done for them in a year to get them from Egypt to Kadesh Barnea, and suddenly they disbelieved what God was promising them. Next one. Disobedience. Sometimes fear can lead us to disobey, just like what happened there. They disobeyed. They disobeyed what God had told them to do. Right. If I can have the next slide. So, how can we go forward? How can we look forward? Because sometimes fear is all about we're not sure, the unknown, what's out there, what's in the future. And that's what sometimes creates the biggest fear in us. is the unknown. So how can we go forward? Well, number one, we can actually confront our fear. That's a big word, confront. That means we can actually say what our fear actually is. You know, sometimes you might have a fear about going to school. Do you have a fear about going to school? And you tell mum and dad, I don't want to go to school, school scares me, I'm a bit afraid of it. But actually what we might be afraid of is, I actually want to be liked and I'm not sure if the people at school like me. And that might be the thing that's under our fear. Sometimes we have fears about our finances and how we're going to afford this and different things like that. And, you know, underlying that fear is actually I want to be comfortable and I'm not going to be. So there's all different things. So sometimes we actually have to state what our real fear is. Next one. And then we should call on God. We need to call on God. We need to tell him about it. In Psalm 34 verse 4, it says, I prayed to the Lord and he answered me. He freed me from all my fears. If we don't tell him about it, he can't free us from our fears. We need to actually tell him about it. And, you know, God may then use other people and special help to free us for what we need to know. But we need to tell him first and we need to ask for help. Next one, claim. Claim, that means to actually take on board. If I go claim a prize, if I win lotto and I don't claim it, then I don't get it, do I? We actually need to claim the promises of God, because God's given us lots of promises to not be afraid and to not fear in his word. And that's where your homework came in. Who did their homework? Yay! We've got lots of homework. Okay, so I've got one over here. I'm just going to pick a couple. But I've got... So why should I be afraid? The Lord is my fortress, protecting me from danger, so why should I tremble? Psalm 118:6, the Lord is for me, so I will have no fear. Proverbs 3, for the Lord, 26, for the Lord is your security. He will keep your foot from being caught in a trap. Proverbs 29 verse 25, fearing people is a dangerous trap, but trusting the Lord means safety. He has all his promises. There's heaps more. But we have to claim them. We have to decide that they are for us. That's why that verse, Psalm 118, the Lord is for me. Sometimes we just treat them as promises for somebody else. But they are promises for us. Next one. And I'm running out of time. We have to cultivate. We have to dig deep. Cultivate means dig. We have to dig deep into God. Do you know what the Israelites were told to do? They were told to commit themselves wholeheartedly to these words of mine. Tie them to your hands. Wear them on your forehead as reminders. Teach them to your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you're on the road, when you're going to bed and when you're getting up. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, so as long as the sky remains above the earth, you and your children may flourish in the land of the Lord. Caleb was actually mentioned later as a man. He got to enter the promised land because he was a man who God said about him, he followed the Lord wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly followed him. So we can have fear, but if we cultivate that relationship with God and claim his promises, we can be without fear. You know, one of our biggest fears can actually be death. My brother-in-law died really recently, just on the 23rd of January. And we visited him the week before he died. thought that he was going to live another month or more. He died from cancer. Didn't have a very long battle with cancer. It was quite short. I've never visited a man who was so at peace about dying. He didn't want to die, but he wasn't afraid to die, because he knew he could have great life here on earth with God, but he was actually going to graduate into God's presence later. You need that assurance, guys, about God in your life. You need that assurance to free you from fear. In Hebrews 2:14-15 it says, "Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death." Only Christ can free us from the fear of death, and only Christ can help us get through the rest of the fears that we might face. You know, when we hear the kids cry in the middle of the night and you can hear that they're afraid, you run down to them and you open their door of their bedroom and you say, "Be courageous." Is that what you do? No. What do? You run in, you put your arms around them. I'm carrying the mic and I've got a mic on my face. You run around, you put your arms around them and you show them love. And this verse sums it up. And so, 1 John 4. Can you find that on my PowerPoint? I've skipped a lot. Cool, keep going. One more. "And so we know and rely on the love of God has for us. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them. This is how love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence on the day of judgment. In this world we are like Jesus. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. We love because he first loved us." And I like that first verse, 16. We know and rely on the love God has for us. That's what we can do. And you know what? Just like we would go and throw our arms around our child, God is waiting there with his arms open wide, just waiting for you, whether you don't know him or whether you've known him for 50 years or more, to just come and be enveloped by his love, so that he can cast out your fear. Next slide. 2 saw the giants compared to God. 10 saw them compared to themselves. 2 saw the giants compared to God. So today I pray that maybe you will go this week and remember to compare your giants, whatever they might be, to the wonderful God who's just waiting to wrap his arms around you. And now we're going to do a bit more remembering his love and actually remembering his care for us by worshipping him in